Thanks everyone for showing up to this Work It Out debate. Today we're going to be talking about the proposition that co-ownership as a concept does not entail a logical contradiction. Advocating for this proposition is going to be Lego, and criticizing this proposition is going to be Zulu. So what's going to happen is this is a free-form conversation over the next 60 minutes, and Lego's going to start by basically, I just want you to tell us what your proposition is and what your argument for it is. And Zulu, as soon as he's basically gotten to his conclusion, the conversation is open, and I'll just jump in as necessary. So I think that that is everything I need to say. So Lego, why don't you take it away?
All right. So the proposition again is co-ownership as a concept does not entail a logical contradiction. So basically, what we mean here is that we're not worried about two people disagreeing. That you can have that sort of contradiction. It does have to be a logical contradiction for this proposition to fail. My argument for this is going to be P1, if co-ownership inherently leads to logical contradictions, then it would be impossible to have a hypothetical case of co-ownership without contradiction. It is possible to have a hypothetical case of co-ownership without contradiction. Therefore, co-ownership does not inherently lead to logical contradiction.
All right. We good to go?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. So I think premise 2 is false. It is not possible to have a case of co-ownership without contradiction. And I can give my argument for that if we're all good.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
launch right
go
into
for
it.
it.
So suppose we have a set of people, A through Z, and we say that they co-own a stick. And suppose A wants to use it to spearfish, and B doesn't want this to happen. So either A is entitled to spearfish, or he isn't. And A owns the stick, if and only if A is entitled to spearfish. That's what it means to own, given our definition. B owns the stick, if and only if A is not entitled to spearfish. Again, just by the definition of ownership we have here. So A and B own the stick, which is our presumption that everybody in the set owns the stick. This implies that A is entitled to spearfish, and A is not entitled to spearfish. This is a contradiction. So P2 is false.
Well, no, because in the case of two people having co-ownership, they would just both have an entitlement. Our definition, you appeal to the definition. The definition doesn't preclude two people from having this entitlement. There isn't this implied if A has the entitlement, then B does not. So you're kind of baking that. I mean, I get why you're arguing it, but it's not part of the definition, so it doesn't make sense to appeal to the definition for that.
Sure, so who gets to control how it's used? If they both have the entitlement to control how it's used, what happens?
They would just follow some agreement. So long as they can come to an agreement that does not have, and we can look at P2 again, so long as it's possible to have a hypothetical case of co-ownership, so some sort of agreement without a contradiction, P2 is fine. Just because there's cases that you may come up with that would have a contradiction, that wouldn't be relevant. You would have to show that there can't ever be a case of co-ownership without contradiction.
No, so I don't have to show that. There is literally 0 possible ways for people to agree how to use a thing. That's not what the debate's about. It's about co-ownership as a concept does not entail a logical contradiction. So it has to also, co-ownership as the concept, has to also deal with the situations where A and B don't come to an agreement over whether spearfishing happens. So what happens then?
In the case that you're giving, you're saying that you don't have two owners there, so that's not a case of co-ownership having a contradiction. That's a case of one owner disagreeing with a non-owner. So that's not applicable.
No. I'm saying everybody in the set, A through Z, co-owns the stick. They all co-own it. A wants to use it to spearfish, B doesn't want that to happen. And they can't come to an agreement over it. So what happens? Does the spearfishing go forth or not?
That would be dependent on the agreement they have as far as the
Right, let's say
co-ownership
they don't have an
goes. So
agreement.
they could have a clause. So they could have a clause in their agreement that says, maybe A can use the sphere on Mondays and B can use it on Wednesdays. And then we'll say C can use it on Thursdays. So you could have 7 people co-owning this sphere, and they're each entitled to use it one day of the week. There's no contradiction there, right?
Okay, so do you think that for any co-ownership arrangement, do they require such clauses, which we can get into further later? Right now, do you think that they require such clauses for every possible conflict that could ever happen?
Well, you
So
didn't
that they
answer
know
my
ahead of time.
question. So P2 only requires that I be able to give an example of co-ownership that doesn't have a contradiction. If I'm able to do that, then P2 is true. So I just gave you an example where 7 people, each allowing to use the sphere one day of the week, that's their entitlement per their agreement. So that is a case of co-ownership. Is there a contradiction in it?
Right. So, given the so if you think it's just, oh well, I can come up with one scenario where we don't have this contradiction, then your argument does not actually establish the point of contention, the proposition, because the proposition is asking about whether the concept of co-ownership, whether that entails a logical contradiction. So, it is possible, potentially. Let's see if it's possible. Can you have a co-ownership arrangement? What would that look like? So I'm asking. You said that they might have a clause put in for if A and B disagree over whether the spearfishing happens. What if they don't have those clauses, or do you think that they have to for any co-ownership arrangement? Do you think that they would have to beforehand make such a clause for every possible conflict that could ever happen?
So I'll point out again that you rejected P2, and P2 only says that it's possible to have a hypothetical case of co-ownership without contradiction. I'm giving you an example, a hypothetical example of co-ownership without contradiction. I've asked you multiple times what the contradiction would be there, and rather than answer,
this is what I'm trying to get
I'm
at,
still
though.
talking. I'm still talking. So instead of answering and giving me the contradiction, you're kind of pivoting to, well, that's not the that's not the proposition. It's like, well, yeah, but it's the premise of my argument that results in the conclusion being true, my position being true. I give you a syllogism for it. So,
Right, so this is what I'm
do
trying to
you
get
accept
at.
P2 now?
Hold on.
Well, no, I just want to know, do you
Hold
accept
on.
P2?
Jesus
Because I
Christ,
gave
shut
you a
up for a
hypothetical
second.
that shows it. I don't
This
have
is-
to shut up,
this
buddy.
is what
This
I'm
is not your
trying to get
show.
to.
I gave you an argument.
This is
You rejected P2.
this
Are you
is
now
what I'm
accepting
trying
P2?
to get to. Let me finish. Is that I think there
As you
is
interrupt
still.
me and you
Shut
tell me
up.
to let you finish, okay?
This is.
I don't
This
have to
there
shut up,
is
buddy. If you're going to interrupt
All right,
me, I'm going
guys,
to
I don't want to
interrupt
have
you,
to.
okay?
Let's just add a little structure here. Let's start with Zulu. Please go ahead, Zulu.
Yes. So I think in this hypothetical scenario, whatever hypothetical scenario you have of co-ownership, even the one where they have this clause, I think there still is a contradiction. And that's what I'm trying to get to. Do they have such clauses for everything? I'm just trying to map out what this looks like, because I have a further... maybe he does come up with that there's clauses for everything. Okay, then that's still going to be... I think that's impossible to have clauses for everything. And furthermore, I have a further objection to clauses as such in this way of building up property rights. That's what I'm trying to say here. So I think there still is a contradiction.
Okay, so do you agree that I gave you a hypothetical where there wasn't a contradiction, or do you
No.
think that there was a contradiction in the case of 7 people using a stick on 7 different days? Was there a contradiction there?
So in that hypothetical, that is not a co-ownership hypothetical. That is person A trades to person B,
Why
trades
not?
to person C, trades to person D, right? And so on and so forth. That is not co-ownership. That is a contract of individual ownership on each of the individual days.
No, this is why would this not be co-ownership? I never said anything about trading. All 7 people own the sphere.
Hold on.
Any one of them could sell their They're right. Well, no, you hold on.
Let's just go through it.
Any one of them can sell.
Just let
Wait,
Lego
one
finish
second.
really quickly. Sorry.
Any one of them can sell their right to the stick, their entitlement. Any one of them could preclude a non-owner from using the stick on their day of the week. They could even let a different owner or non-owner use the stick on a day of the week that they're entitled to the spear. So there's no reason that this is trading and not co-ownership. This is a case of 7 people owning a stick without contradiction. So P2 is true.
Yeah, so let's just go through the scenarios. You laid it out that John is entitled, let's just say person 1 is entitled on day 1, person 2 is entitled on day 2, person 3, and so on, up until person N is entitled on day N. Well, let's look at our definition of ownership again. Ownership is the state of possessing an entitlement to control how something is put to use. Person 1 owns it on day 1. He doesn't have the entitlement on day 2, so he doesn't own it on day 2. Person 2 owns it on day 2, and so on and so forth. We have as a contract set up where it just goes around in a circle. Keeps getting traded back and forth between them.
No, we already established even prior to the debate, so maybe moderator does need to give his disclosure that we thought may not be necessary, that the definition, this was overtly expressed prior to the debate, that this definition does not imply that you can't have co-ownership, which is now what you're trying to lean on.
What I said
you're trying to say, well, no, it says here.
Your scenario was that it gets traded.
I'll go in and weigh in on this. So of course, we're not ahead of time. So I guess everyone doesn't know this. So I'll disclose this. We agreed ahead of time that the definition of ownership that was agreed upon, you guys can see it on the live stream. Am I streaming, guys? Yeah, I am streaming. You guys can see it here in the box on the left, that the definition does not explicitly state one way or the other whether or not Zulu or Lego are correct. So this definition that was agreed to by both of the participants does not explicitly say that co-ownership is or isn't exclusive to one person. But the entire debate doesn't make any sense unless what we're talking about is what are the implications of this definition. So we agreed not to argue. So nobody, just in the case of this argument, neither participant is permitted to argue that the definition itself implies that single or multiple person is a valid form of ownership. But the whole debate doesn't make any sense unless what we are talking about is what are the implications of this definition. And I'm keeping track of everything here to make sure that what we're discussing is not the definition itself, and what we are discussing are the implications. And as far as I can tell right now, we are still solely discussing the implications of the definition and not the definition itself. But if you think that somebody is discussing the definition, please just say, moderator, they're only discussing the definition and not the implications, and here's why. And then we can have a ruling on that.
Yeah, so I would
okay. Well, that's what. Well, I would like a ruling on it then, because he's clearly saying that. Oh no, it says in the definition that whoever has control is the owner.
Right, do you understand that?
He's saying that because only one person on that day has control, they are therefore the only owner.
Jesus Christ.
He's appealing to the fact that the language in the definition, which I pointed out before we started the debate, that the language indicates that it's an individual, but that it's not implied that only that individual could have ownership, which was agreed to prior to the debate. That is not implied. So,
well,
I want to also be clear. I never agreed to that the definition can't imply anything about whether I'm right or you're right. All right, and you spent a long time figuring out a definition you'd be fine with, and we all agreed to this definition. And if it still doesn't fit your standards,
yeah, we agreed with it with the disclaimer that you cannot use the individual language. The fact that it's expressed as if it's an individual, you cannot use that language as a crutch to then assert that tautologically ownership is only a single individual. Yes, we did discuss this.
Just one moment. All right, so just a moment. I want to clarify something. I think Zulu and Lego will both appreciate this clarification. It is not the case that Zulu agreed to that ruling ahead of time. It is the case that I agreed as the moderator that I would rule against it, so that if it was the case that an argument... So Zulu is not consenting to that. Zulu never acceded to that. I said as the moderator, because we went through a lengthy process of determining what would be the proper definitions. Lego was ultimately the progenitor of that definition and gave the final approval.
I wasn't the progenitor. I gave approval.
Well, you were the one who...
I gave approval with the understanding that you overtly agreed to that it does not imply individual ownership.
Yep, that's
So
correct.
right,
That's correct.
yeah, I'm not the
So-
progenitor of the definition.
Well, what I meant to communicate there was that you had a role. You had a very involved role in coming up with the definition through my own criteria of clarity. But I'm not trying to attribute anything tricky there. So Lego proved it. Zulu didn't. But what Lego's referring to there is that in this debate, I agreed that if any argument was made based on the definition, that I would rule against it immediately. So on the screen right now, as far as I can tell, Zulu, and please tell me if I'm mischaracterizing your argument here. I am following Zulu's argument as fast as I can. Obviously, it's difficult to transcribe at real time, but I am seeing that an argument is being made from the implications of the definition. I don't see any appeal to the definition here. If what we say is that everything that is an implication is also necessarily an appeal to the definition itself, then that would be that would invalidate both sides, because then that would, if that's the criteria, then the definition would necessarily imply that Lego's correct, because we wouldn't be able to analyze any implications. So as far as I can
Okay,
see,
so
this is an argument that's based on implication. It's not appealing.
I
to
want
the
clarity
definition.
then. I want clarity. So you're saying then that the definition, the meaning of the definition that we're using for this debate is that whoever is in immediate control and has an entitlement to that control is the owner. That there cannot be someone else that's not in control.
I was trying to explain to you like 12 minutes ago.
No, I want him to explain, because the definition is now being used in exactly the way that I objected to. Yeah, it is crystal clear, and I objected to this obvious outcome of you just appealing to the language of the definition.
Hold on, because you're saying now I'm just appealing to the definition.
It's subtle
and you aren't
nod
letting me
to
finish
individual
explain what I was
ownership.
doing.
Well, you won't even tell me if you still object to P2. Is
Holy
that what we're
shit,
talking
bro.
about right now? P2?
Holy shit.
Yeah, holy shit, bro. Yeah, holy shit, bro.
20 minutes ago, I was saying
Are you
yes,
still,
I'm disagreeing
are you still
with
objecting
P2,
to P2? Okay.
and here's why.
Okay.
And then you came up
So
with
go
the
ahead.
scenario of it trading between individual people, each person owning on a different day of the
I didn't
week.
say trading between individual people. I said they all own it.
Violating the rules of the
I
debate.
said they all
This
own
is
it.
insanity.
Yes.
Can I finish?
I never said that they were
and
trading.
explain
Yeah,
to
go
you
ahead.
Why? Okay. The reason why each individual person, where it goes, okay, A is entitled on day A, B is entitled on day B, so on and so forth, that you are not describing there co-ownership. What is co about this ownership? There's nothing co about this ownership, because on day one, it's person one who has the entitlement to use it, which we define as ownership. Okay, so we know that person one owns it, but person two, he's not entitled to do anything with it, because based on the way you described the scenario, not based on the definition, based on the way you described your hypothetical, person two is only entitled to it on day two, not on day one. You don't get to do shit with it on day one. So how is this a co-ownership situation? It's not. Co-ownership
I would say that it is
A
still
and B,
the case, but
both are entitled to it on whatever time, right? Which then
yeah, so we can do we can. Well, no, there's no contradiction there actually, but I can easily give a different hypothetical of there being a pool where all 7 of these people are allowed to use the pool on all 7 days, and then they can have agreements such as, or clauses in their ownership agreement that say that you're not allowed to preclude other owners from use or substantially impede on their access to the pool. They can have clauses that result in mediation if there's a violation or a disagreement. So we can have
clauses for every
we can easily have a hypothetical. Yeah, I think if you have a clause that covers mediation for disagreements that are unforeseen, then yeah, you. I literally just answered that, and then you just asked the same question. So
because I think it's ludicrous.
In the case of the pool, in the case of the pool, we do have multiple owners having an entitlement to use at the same time. So therefore, we have co-ownership, right? That was your
So
That was your
I want to
objection with the
know,
spear, right? They're not using it at the same time.
have you ever encountered a contract where it's infinity pages long and it's got a clause for every possible thing that could ever happen?
What is the contradiction with having multiple people have entitlement to a pool at the same time?
Well, that doesn't sound like an answer.
Well, we're talking about P2. You say that it's not possible to have an
Why do you
agreement
keep
where there's
running
no
back to
contradiction.
P2 the
I'm
second I
giving
find an
you
issue with you?
because that's the part you reject. Obviously, I'm
Right,
going to go
and
back to the thing you're
You do
rejecting
not
in my
know how
argument.
discussion works. We have to build up from
Do you not know
that
how
to see
arguments
why it's a
work? You
problem.
rejected
Okay,
P2.
I can run you down the
You
flow if you
rejected
want.
P2.
I can run you through the fucking flow.
I don't need a
Right?
flow.
We start with.
Tell me the contradiction in multiple people having
Jesus
entitlement to the
fucking
pool
Christ,
at the
shut
same
up for
time.
3
Right,
seconds.
gentlemen, I just want to say, if I have to mute anybody during this, I want you to know that it's actually not punitive. It's only going to be done so I can regain the conversation and get it right back on track. So just be aware that if we keep talking over each other, I'm going to do that just for the sake of keeping the conversation flowing.
Okay, so
Zulu, do you want to just take it from there?
yes. I suppose now I've got to explain how conversations work. So we started with I am objecting to premise 2, right? I'm objecting to premise 2 because I think it leads to contradiction. And you said, well, no, actually, you can have a situation of co-ownership where there isn't any of these contradictions. Okay, and we go down one path, and now we're back to that, and then you go down this new path of it's a pool. The reason why you can have a hypothetical case of co-ownership without a contradiction is because of this pool thing that goes on. Okay, and then I'm explaining to you why the pool is still erroneous. And I'm asking you about the pool situation. You said in the pool situation, they have a clause for every possible conflict. And I'm asking, how does that happen in a contract? Is this contract infinity pages long to have infinity clauses?
No, it doesn't need to be. They can just have a clause. They can have a long agreement, and then they could ultimately have a clause that says that for any unforeseen disagreements or violations, it'll go to mediation, and then mediation will ultimately make a determination, even if it's not overtly expressed in any individual clause what the outcome should be. So we can easily address things that aren't explicitly addressed by an individual clause. So then we go back, we have 7 people with the entitlement to the pool. We have a contract or an agreement that basically, as far as I can tell, addresses your concerns as far as the spear not being ownership. You said that they didn't all have entitlement. In the case of the pool, they do all have entitlement, and they can all use the pool at the same time. So we've defeated that objection to P2. So what is the contradiction in the new hypothetical?
Okay, so my argument against this is that I think it's a stolen concept fallacy. So I want you to elaborate. Could you have a co-ownership situation? Okay, we'll just stick with this right now. This is a co-ownership situation where the property right is coming out of a contract. Right? We can all agree that that's what's happening. It's got all these clauses and these mediators and everything. But contracts are contracts about property. You don't get the concept of contract until you have the concept property. So the concept of property is more fundamental. Therefore, it doesn't come from contracts. You don't have property coming from contracts. So if the way you get to group property is by having it just declared by contractual fiat, then it's invalid because it steals the concept of property.
No, we're talking about ownership here. We have a definition of ownership that only requires entitlement.
Ownership, then
and
ownership, a fucking synonym.
Yeah. We have our concept of ownership here. So we're working within that definition. And in the case of the pool hypothetical I gave you, it meets that definition of ownership. And we have multiple people meeting this definition of ownership. So we have multiple owners. So P2 is satisfied. P2 is true. The conclusion follows. The conclusion is my proposition for this debate. It doesn't
follow because you're committing a conceptual fallacy.
What's the contradiction in the hypothetical I gave you with the pool then?
You're convinced. Do you want to address the stolen concept fallacy?
Yeah, you think that you can just say a bunch of stuff. All I have to do.
All right, let's see if I can get things back on track here. Lego, it seems to me like you've outlined a situation that you're satisfied with. Shows co-ownership without contradiction. That's the pool example. Not that they own a pool, but it's a pool of owners, and
No. They own
they're
a pool.
shared. Oh, they own a physical pool. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, so they do physically own a pool, and that ownership over the pool is governed or described by some sort of contract between all of them, which contains all of the clauses. And like you said, you don't need an infinite amount of explicitly stated clauses. It can have a sort of like for any unforeseen conflicts kind of thing. But it's all described within this contract. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that sounds fair.
Okay,
Which I
so
would say, just to add one little bit to that, which I would say satisfies P2 of my argument.
sure. So it seems to me that to satisfy P2, you're like what Zulu's saying here is that you're using the word or the idea of a contract to
It doesn't have to be a
justify.
contract. Well, we won't say contract then. We'll just say ownership agreement, co-ownership agreement.
That's just another word for
Okay.
contract. bro.
Zulu, can I substitute? Yeah, can I just substitute?
You're the one saying it
word,
doesn't qualify.
Can I substitute, Zulu, with your permission, the word ownership agreement for contract going forward?
Okay, well, hold on. This is gonna. I just wanted to make clear here. That's gonna make it a whole lot wordier, and it still doesn't escape the fact that it's a stolen concept. So I'm just going to translate in my head.
It's not a stolen
contract to
concept.
ownership agreement, whatever it's called.
Yeah, I'm not going
every time.
to impose that on you. I'm just saying I'm going to say that.
Okay.
And
Right.
with understanding. I don't want to imply any sort of obligation on your part. But so there's an ownership agreement. So you're just saying that Lego, this co-ownership circumstance is described by and defined by an ownership agreement between all of those participants, right?
Yeah.
And Zulu is saying he's like this is a logically appropriate next, because we've got P2, one objection, one counter argument, second objection, second counter argument. So this is the logical. So now what we're saying is, well, ownership agreements themselves are committing a fallacy because you can't. Well, maybe I'll let Zulu. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I feel like you'll do a better example, but it's something.
sure.
It's something like this, right, Zulu? An
So-
ownership agreement can't come before a property because it is relying on the concept of property to make sense.
Yeah, so basically he's doing like the contract theory of property here, where it's, well, we just agree that we'll use property in this way, and then that's what the property rights are. I think that steals the concept of contract, because contracts are contracts about property. You can't have contract be the primordial thing from which you get property. It's a fallacy.
All my argument relies on is it being possible that we satisfy the definition of ownership with multiple people at the same time,
But you
which the
can't do that with a
hypothetical I
fallacy.
gave does. So,
What you're doing-
well, I'm still talking. So
You're
I'm
committing
still
a
talking.
fallacy.
So in the case of the pool hypothetical, it does satisfy the definition of ownership. I don't have to appeal to contracts or property theory. I don't have to appeal to
You
any of
did.
that. I only have to satisfy the definition of ownership and multiple people satisfying it at the same time, which the pool example does.
But the only way you were able to do that was by committing this fallacy. So it's got to be out. It's
There's
got
no
to be
fallacy.
dropped
You're
from the
just
flow.
claiming a
can't
fallacy.
be
There's not
considered.
one. There's nothing I'm saying that's fallacious. You can have multiple
There is.
people
You're
coming to
stealing
an
the concept
agreement that
of
satisfies. I'm not even talking about contracts. I'm just talking about multiple people coming to an agreement where
What do you
more
think
than
a
one
contract
person
is?
satisfies the definition of ownership. Okay,
But-
you're the one
but-
calling it a stolen concept. You're the one who's saying it's not a contract. But then whenever I call it something else, you go, "Oh no, that's
I'm
a
saying
contract."
It is a
So you're the one
contract,
contradicting
and that you're
yourself.
stealing that concept. And
Okay,
that
then stop
contract
saying it's a
can't
stolen
come before
concept.
property.
No, you don't get to call it. You don't get to demand that it's called a.
Really quickly, muting, not punitive. I'm just trying to get control here. What I want to do, and I think this is going to be helpful for Lego. Zulu, I'm going to ask you to really quickly work with me over just the next 60 seconds. I want you to describe, and I'm going to visualize as you do this. I want you to make it clear to everybody what is happening. So I understand the stolen concept fallacy as you described it. You're going to tell me what you think the argument that Lego's making and where the exact inferences that's happening, where the inference isn't appropriate. Does that okay? So let's go with that. So straight from step one, Zulu, I've got you unmuted there. I'm gonna unmute you as well, Lego, just so I'm back in control of the conversation.
Yeah,
So
that's fine.
let's really quickly, Zulu, just from step one here, because as you can see in the descriptions here, I've got the points and there's the inferences. So what I want to find is where the inference breaks down. So let's just do it so everyone can benefit from this from step one.
So I'm describing why I think Lego is committing the stolen concept fallacy.
Right.
Okay. So
I want you to not just don't describe the stolen concept fallacy as a fallacy.
like I'm going to go back to like
Let's
P2
I
and
want
build
you
it
to
up.
tell me what. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So his premise 2.
And Lego, I know that he's probably going to say something that you disagree with about your argument. We'll let him finish, and then you can come in and you can attack the part that you think he gets wrong. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Let's go, Zulu.
Okay. So his premise 2 was that it is possible to have a hypothetical case of co-ownership without contradiction. And down this line of the flow in particular, it was that well, we could have some hypothetical scenario where there's a bunch of people owning a pool, and they just come to an agreement that they're going to own a pool, and they've got all these clauses put up that what they're going to do in specific situations, and the catch-all clause is going to be we'll go to arbitration with whatever arbiter, right? Okay, so what I think this is doing, what I think the error with this is that it is the people just get together and they all just say, hey, let's just all agree that we'll all own this by this thing called a contract. Now, that is stealing the concept of contract, because contract are contracts about property. We need to first have our property theory before we can know whether this is even a valid thing. And his property theory is attempting to be based upon the concept of contract. That's a stolen concept.
Okay, so property theory is a necessary prerequisite for what?
Or contract theory.
Because contracts are about property.
Yeah.
So, and just to make this clear, we can say an ownership agreement theory as well, right? Like, so that's what we're talking about here. So Zulu's contending, if I'm understanding correctly, that you cannot put forward a theory of contracts without first having a theory of property in place. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so
maybe
so
you can
I
jump
just
in
want
there,
to
like
be clear, like the upside of this.
Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. So like the upside of this would be that he would have to have some sort of primordial case of co-ownership, whatever that would end up being, where it's not, well, we'll just have co-ownership because we all came together and agreed on it. It would have to be like somehow in nature. How do we get here from first principles? Like we can't just appeal to contract.
Okay, I think I'm following along, but rather than making everyone sit through my contemplative silence, Lego, you can jump back in now if you'd like to give your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would just point out that I'm perfectly fine with leaving out Zulu's concept of contracts. I don't need to appeal to his concept of contracts and then deny it, or his theory of property and then deny it. All I actually need to do is give a hypothetical that satisfies the agreed upon definition of ownership, which we have here on the screen. So long as they have this entitlement, they qualify as an owner. Well, I'm giving a hypothetical that has people who have come to an agreement, regardless of whether we call it a contract. I'm not appealing to his concept of contract. I'm just giving a hypothetical which satisfies P2, where multiple people have come to an agreement that gives them the entitlement that qualifies as ownership. So you can't call it a stolen concept fallacy because I'm not appealing to his concept. I actually probably reject his concept outright. I'm not appealing to it at all. Now, maybe there's some similarities, but it's neither here nor there. The only thing I need to do for P2 to be satisfied is give a hypothetical where multiple people have satisfied our definition of ownership, and that has been done.
Yeah, so I'm not worried whether you call it a contract or whether you're using my concept of contract or whatever. I'm worried that you still are using the concept of a contract, but that is the root of your property theory. You're trying to derive property from contract. I don't care what you call it.
No, I'm just pointing out that the people all satisfy our definition of ownership. We have multiple people satisfying that definition through agreement. Therefore, we have a co-ownership agreement that satisfies the definition. We
But
have
the
multiple
only way you were
owners,
able to
so
do that
P2
was
is
by committing
satisfied.
a conceptual fallacy.
No, I didn't commit the fallacy. You're just
Yes, you did.
asserting that because you have no way to, I guess, address
I'm
my
not
argument.
just asserting it. You haven't even
No, I
begun
didn't.
to address
So
the fact that this is a
you
stolen
are.
concept.
It's not a stolen concept.
Why not?
Let me see if I can. I want to try to see if I've been able to. I want to see.
I've already
if I
pointed
can-
out why not.
Zulu,
I'm not
is it
appealing to
fair
your
to say-
concept and then rejecting it. So it's not a stolen concept.
So this debate is fundamentally concerning the nature of ownership and property itself. And it sounds like Zulu's saying therefore, we cannot determine anything about the nature of ownership or property by appealing to some other concept which itself assumes something about the nature of ownership or property. Is that a succinct way of saying what fallacy you're pointing out here, Zulu?
Yeah, that would be like the general case of it. And I think, in particular here, he is his shining light hypothetical, which is supposed to be the one which can satisfy our definition. That hypothetical is built on. Now, I'm not concerned about him plagiarizing my understanding of what contracts are, whatever. Right? I'm not concerned about any of that. Right? I'm concerned about the fact that it's all about, oh yes, let's just come together and agree that we'll all own this pool. That's the contract theory of property. It isn't, oh well, they got out there and they homesteaded it and they did these specific things. It's nothing like that. It's nothing of the sort. It's not appealing to the nature of things. It's not even appealing to, like, the king said so or something, which would be slightly, more acceptable. This is just saying, well, we all just agreed. We all just came together and we all just agreed. That is the contract theory of property. That's what it is. And that is a stolen concept fallacy because contracts are contracts about property.
I'm just going to point out that it's actually Zulu contradicting himself because he's demanding that we consider this a contract, but at the same time he wants to reject that it's a legitimate contract or a valid
I'm
contract. He wants to consider it fallacious.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so you're the one contradicting yourself. You're the one. I'm talking actually. I'm actually still talking. So you're the one contradicting yourself when you continue to insist that this is a contract, but that it's not a contract. I'm not contradicting myself. I'm not even calling it a contract at this point, and I'm not appealing to your concept of contract. So if you want to insist that it's a contract, that's fine. You can do that, but you can't then also call it a stolen concept fallacy whenever you're the one who's insisting that it's within the set of this concept.
Okay, well,
I'm fine with calling. I don't care what we call it. I'm not appealing to your concept. I'm not appealing to your concept. Okay. No. A stolen concept fallacy would require that I'm appealing to a concept that I reject, which I'm not doing. So
all right,
I don't need sorcery.
I'm going to move this along just because we've already discussed this. I don't think we're going to make any headway here. So I want to ask Zulu a question, and Lego, feel free to just jump in as soon as he's finished with answering the question. The question is it the case that the concept of an ownership agreement, and you're welcome to interpret that as the word contract. Is it the case that the concept of an ownership agreement inappropriately assumes something about the nature of property or ownership? And if you're going to give the affirmative answer, please tell me what that assumption is.
Okay, so inappropriately within, like, what context? Just like in general, does the concept of a contract inappropriately do anything? Or like specifically the way he's doing it?
If I understand correctly, you're saying it's inappropriate on the basis that it's some sort of there's like the the stolen concept fallacy, as I understand it so far, means that you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. So you would say,
Yeah.
there's some way that so when he's giving his pool example, he is including in that explanation of how the pool example works some idea of an ownership agreement. And by including that in his answer, he's doing something wrong. And so my question, and it seems to be based on the stolen concept fallacy as you described it, what he's doing wrong is he's assuming something about this more primordial concept, which is either property or nature. Or sorry, either property or ownership. So my question is, what exactly is it that he's assuming by including an ownership agreement that is rendering what he's saying invalid?
Okay, so sort of
I have it here. I have it here up on the screen. I'm hoping that makes it clear.
yeah. So sort of what that would entail for the concept of property when you invert contract and property, when you have contract first and property second, is that property is just whatever the hell you want. It can just be whatever. It's just pure fiat. It doesn't have any actual relationship to any problem that we face. It's no longer tied to scarcity. This is his other big hoo-ha over that I was against IP.
Sure. Do you think it's fair for me to say in that case that if somebody's not concerned with the definition being by fiat, that that's not necessarily a problem yet?
Well, I mean, but then the whole debate's just nothing. It just evaporates. Like, who cares? We can just say whatever we want. We can just say, well, I own it, and no, I own it, and then, like, what are we even doing? Like, if we're not even appealing to the nature of things or
Is it
conflict
fair
or
for me to
anything.
say, and this is me giving Lego an opportunity to jump back in here, but my question for you, Lego, is am I adequately characterizing your position as property is by fiat and that's not a problem because the reason that property being fiat isn't a problem is because you're capable of providing examples of ownership that don't involve contradictions?
No, my point is that our concept of ownership that we're working with is just that someone possesses this entitlement of control that qualifies as ownership. I'm giving a hypothetical where multiple people have an entitlement of control, therefore multiple people have ownership, which satisfies P2 of my argument. I don't need to go into property theory or anything. All that matters is whether or not we have multiple people with an entitlement of control, which they do. So we have co-ownership. If it satisfies the definition of ownership, it is ownership.
Okay, that's very interesting. I'll try to move since we're getting to a little bit of a lull here. I'll try to move things on if I may. Prompt here. So how about this, Lego? I'd like to know about. I would like to run by a hypothetical with you myself and see what your answer is to this hypothetical. So my hypothetical is this: let's say I have $1,000 in the bank, but I want to act as if I have $1 million in the bank. And so if I said to my friends, like, I'm going to buy everybody here McDonald's, there's no actual problem entailed by this sort of non-truth, right? But there's a breaking point in which, like, I can buy all my friends McDonald's unless I had like 1,000 friends. But I can buy all my friends McDonald's, but I can't go and I can't buy a Porsche. I can't buy a sports car. So there's a breaking point where that that breaking point represents the meaning. So that breaking point is what makes it the difference between whether I own $1,000 or whether I own $1 million. Now I'm going to relate that to the theory of ownership by asking this question. So my ability to buy McDonald's for my friends doesn't demonstrate that I do or don't have $1 million. Just like hypothetically, if you had a couple of different people who were saying they owned this, let's go back to the Friday Crusoe example here, just to keep it simple. Let's say you've got two people who are both claiming to own a stick. As long as it's the case that they're both, they're not having exclusive desires for that stick, there's no breakdown. When we're talking about ownership, though, it seems to be the case that we're talking about something that resolves conflict. And I would want to know, some people are going to put forward the idea that conflict is the point where the concept of co-ownership breaks down and its invalidity is exposed, just like the way that my inability to buy a sports car is an example of how claiming to have $1 million when I only have 1,000 breaks down. So my question is, the criticism I think is clear there, that resolving conflicts represents some sort of concrete breaking point for a concept of co-ownership. Why do you think that that's not the case?
Why do I think what's not the case?
So do you agree with the hypothetical that I've given, or do you the point that the
What is your,
hypothetical is
just answer your
attempting to make?
question. What is the question? You said a lot there, but you basically just ended with, "Do you agree?" And honestly, I feel like your question is kind of missing the point. It is co-ownership if multiple people have this or possess this entitlement. The fact that you can say you have $1 million when you only have 1,000 doesn't seem particularly relevant. The fact that you can't buy a Porsche with $1,000 doesn't seem relevant. I'm not sure what exactly it is you're even trying to get to here.
Sure, yeah. Well, I apologize if there's any lack of clarity in that question. So what I'm saying is that there are certain functional components of ownership and property rights, and I'm not trying to. I want to be
I just
clear.
want
I'm
to know
not
what
trying
the
to join
question
in.
is.
Yeah,
I
sure. I'm
heard
just
your
trying
whole
to.
hypothetical. What is your question, like explicitly?
Yep, I'm getting there. Thank you. I do understand you've asked me to clarify. I'm just clarifying for
I
everybody
don't want
here.
you to clarify like the hypothetical, though. I
Okay,
just want you to
I'm gonna mute
explicitly.
you so that I can get. I'm gonna mute you so I can finish. I'm just clarifying for everybody in the audience really quickly here. I'm only trying to prompt the participants here because we had a little lull. I'm not trying to join into the conversation. The question, and Lego, if you really, if after this explanation you still don't answer it, I'll see if Lego gets it, and if not, then I'll take the L on being not very clear. So what my question is I'm putting forward the suggestion that the inability to resolve conflicts is a breaking point for concepts of co-ownership, which means that it might be the case that co-ownership is invalid as a concept, even if there are some cases where it doesn't produce issues to use the concept of co-ownership. So if that's the case, I've given an example where co-ownership is experiencing a potential breaking point, which is the resolution of conflict, or specifically when the two people who both have the entitlement want to do things that are exclusive with each other, right? Now, I want to clarify that this is, if you say something back to me like, well, they have an agreement or a clause, then you're exiting the hypothetical that I'm asking you because I'm setting up a hypothetical where there's a conflict and an ability to come to terms. The question I'm asking is, we're discussing, we're exploring a potential breaking point, which is the inability to resolve conflict. Why do you think that hypothetical fails to show a worthwhile problem with co-ownership? And then now that I've made myself clear, Zulu, if you wish, when he responds, you can take it from there. I'm not going to I don't want to do a back and forth.
Yeah, I'm not saying that co-ownership agreements wouldn't address conflict or resolve conflict. I'm not suggesting that at all. If anything, the agreements would resolve conflict, and that's a huge part of what makes them ownership agreements between these different owners. So, does that answer your question, or am I missing the question?
No, I think you got it. Yeah, that's a huge part of what makes them ownership agreements. Right. So let's say it's Crusoe and Friday on the island. Crusoe wants to use a stick to spearfish. Friday doesn't want this to happen. We say they both own it. They're in a conflict. They're getting to blows over this, right? Crusoe is about to launch his nuclear missile to the other side of the island to kill Friday and all the Friday worshippers who want to use the stick who don't want to use the stick to spearfish, right? What should happen here? We've got a conflict. They're not going to agree over it, right? We're in primordial level. All they've done so far is just said, hey, Friday, let's both own the stick. Friday's like, yeah, sure, Crusoe, let's do that. Which isn't even properly primordial, by the way. I don't even know what that would mean. So this is just the most basic form of an agreed upon co-ownership agreement, what the fuck do they do?
Yeah, it seems like you're just trying to give an example where someone is either violating the agreement. I imagine
call it a
that some
breaking
part of the
point.
agreement. Yeah, but you can have breaking points of this sort with any sort of agreement. It doesn't matter.
No.
The fact of the matter
No,
is
you
that we can
can't.
have co-ownership. The fact of the matter is that
No, you
the
only
fact
get
that
it with
of the matter is that we can have.
when you
I'm
commit all
still
these
talking.
conceptual
Actually, I'm
fallacies.
still
That's when
talking.
you get
I'm still
these
talking. I'm
breaking
actually still
points.
talking.
Sorry,
I'm
Zulu,
actually still talking.
just let
So
Lego finish. Sorry.
yeah, the point that I'm making is that we can have an agreement that does address conflict, that does give us clear winners in the conflict, and does give multiple people this entitlement that we've defined as ownership. So the fact that you could have a situation where someone violates an agreement, or that you could have a situation where someone shoots a nuke at somebody, that doesn't show any sort of inherent contradiction with co-ownership. Even if you gave a hypothetical where the agreement itself did have contradiction, that wouldn't satisfy P2. That wouldn't be enough for us to reject P2. I only need to be able to give a hypothetical where P2 is satisfied. As long as I can do at least one, there is no inherent contradiction to co-ownership, because we can have some cases where it works. So I would take us back to the pool. There, you can have conflict resolution here. You can even have it to where the owners, if someone who's not an owner comes and they say, "Well, I'm getting in the pool," or I'm going to fill the pool up with sand," whatever it is, those owners can say, "No, we're excluding you because we're the owners," and we have a clear resolution to who wins that conflict. Those co-owners win that conflict, and then if there's a disagreement among the co-owners, they can have agreements that address that, or clauses in the agreement that address that. And then for anything unforeseen, they would go to arbitration, as you said. So there's no reason that just because a conflict could happen, we would therefore reject co-ownership as a concept.
Right. So to be clear, your solution to, well, what if the co-owners don't agree, which was the question posed by the moderator's hypothetical, is, well, they just will agree. It's the equivalent of, well, what if I tried to buy the Porsche after I acted on the concept that I have $1 million? And your response to that would be, you won't buy a Porsche. You won't try and buy the Porsche. Like, this is you're
Yeah, you
in
wouldn't
the
have
moderator's words, you're
a
exiting the
co-ownership agreement in
hypothetical.
the case of y'all not agreeing. No, if they don't agree, then they don't have a co-ownership agreement. Yeah, that is the case. That if they don't agree, they don't have a co-ownership agreement. But once they agree to this co-ownership agreement,
Okay,
they can have disagreement that follows that, and they would refer back to the agreement to resolve that conflict. So you still have conflict resolution. It's just that in the case of the co-owners not agreeing
no,
upfront to
you don't
even
have conflict
become
resolution
co-owners, you
anymore.
just wouldn't have a co-ownership agreement.
You
Yeah,
no
you
longer have
do
conflict
actually.
resolution, which you said that they have agreements to resolve conflict. That is a huge part. Conflicts is a huge part of what makes them ownership agreements. That's a quote from you. And your idea of an ownership agreement is that it ceases. It just stops existing the instant a conflict comes along. That's not an agreement to resolve conflicts. That's nothing to do with conflict. Like it
No,
only works when there isn't
co-ownership
conflict.
agreement
Which
resolves
just
those conflicts.
the
No, the
concept of
co-ownership
that
Lego,
agreement
Lego,
resolves those conflicts.
sorry, Lego. Just let him finish right quick, please. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I just
It
wanted to
seems
touch on
finished. It doesn't
the concept
evaporate. It doesn't evaporate
is
just because there's a
disappearing
conflict.
when you have this situation.
No, it's not.
There is no need of having this concept of ownership if the instant you get to a situation, this breaking point where, well, there's a conflict now, is, well, then they don't have an agreement. It's like, yeah, brilliant. And then we no longer have anything.
Yeah, not what I said. Not what I said. I said that if they don't come to an agreement up front, then there won't be co-ownership. There won't be a co-ownership agreement if they don't come to an initial agreement to be co-owners. But once they have a co-ownership agreement, the agreement will clearly stipulate, okay, this is how we resolve conflict. So you still have conflict resolution in the agreement. Just because they disagree prior to an agreement doesn't mean that you somehow negate the entire agreement once it's actually occurred.
I've just a real quick question for you. Let's say they've followed all your rules. They've got a bunch of clauses, and they've said, "Yep, we're going to go to the highest arbiter in the land. Whoever the best arbiter in the world is, we're going to go to them." And then disaster strikes. Everybody but Crusoe and Friday in the whole world is dead. And now they got to figure out what happens with the stick. Does their ownership disappear? now that they no longer have any arbiter to possibly go to?
In the case of two people, would they still have? I mean, assuming that their ownership agreement. I'm trying to conceptualize what you're talking about. Okay, so we have a co-ownership agreement that requires that they go to arbitration in the case of disagreement, and then this is now impossible due to everybody else being dead. Yeah, it would sound like their ownership agreement is dissolved almost necessarily. Like you're just talking about two random people
Okay, so you think at that point
being the last two people on Earth. Yeah, I don't know what
let's-
ownership means in that case.
Okay, so let's. Well, I mean, ownership. It has a huge. That's a huge part of what makes them ownership agreements, referring to conflict avoidance. So they can still have conflict. So that's a huge part of what makes them ownership agreements, as we all know from Lego. The problem with this situation then is that what happens with the property? Does it just the stick still exists? Do they is it just back into nature? Do they just have like to do a mad dash towards it to see who can homestead it first? Why is it abandoned? Like what is abandonment on
Yeah,
first principles on your view?
Yeah, I mean, so this doesn't at all show that a contradiction is inherent to co-ownership. This, I mean, like this is basically entirely off topic. You're basically just saying that if everybody in the world died but two people, what would ownership mean? And that's not the point I'm making or
I'm
addressing. What I'm
showing
talking
that
about
your
here is that we
concept
can
cannot
get
apply to
that
every
we. I'm
possible
still talking
situation.
actually.
You
I'm
can
still
avoid
talking actually.
conflicts.
I'm
You
actually
can.
still
Let him finish
talking.
there, Zulu.
So I'm actually still talking. Yeah. So all I need to show is that we can have a hypothetical situation where you would have multiple owners without a contradiction. That satisfies P2. The fact that you can posit a hypothetical of everyone in the world dying, that doesn't do anything to address P2 at all. So I would have to kind of pull us back to my argument as the advocate here. Are you still trying to address P2? Because if so, I would say you've kind of wandered. You've lost the thread a little bit.
Well, I was riffing. We were riffing there.
Yeah, you're riffing into territory that has nothing to do with the debate.
Actually,
You're riffing
well,
about
you know,
apocalypse.
if
I
we're going to
mean,
have the moderator come in and stipulate that we can't have any just the definition includes anything, and I don't have to agree to that, fine, whatever. Then we can also have the moderator come in and bring up a hypothetical scenario for you to address, and have us riff on that to fill the dead air. So
yeah,
I am
the
not doing
moderator didn't bring
anything
up
untoward there
apocalypse. You're
at
bringing that
all.
up. I didn't say you're doing anything untoward. I'm just pulling you back as the advocate. I have an argument here. You rejected P2, and now you're going down a line of dialogue that has nothing to do with P2. So I'm going to pull you back to my argument. Do you have any sort of way of addressing P2? Why it necessarily entails a contradiction?
Well, I'm sure
Because
that
I've given you a hypothetical that doesn't.
I'm sure that Zulu feels that he has done that. Zulu, unless you are going in a new direction, I'd like to ask another hypothetical really quickly. It's very, very quick.
Sure.
Lego, if Crusoe and Friday say, "Hey," and this is the literal conversation they have. They say, "Hey, let's both own this stick because it could be useful to both of us." And they say, "Okay, sure." Are they now in a legitimate co-ownership arrangement with you, or is there some other criteria that they haven't yet satisfied?
Do they both have some entitlement that satisfies the definition of ownership that we are working with?
That felt like a question, and I was looking
It was
for
a
an answer.
question. You're asking me if they're owners, and I'm asking you, well, you didn't really
So
express in your hypothetical whether or not they both have this entitlement that would be the thing that determines whether they're owners or not. So
okay, so I must have missed something in my hypothetical. I apologize for that. So let's say that these two individuals, I'll even simplify it further. We'll do A and B, okay? And they're on an island where at the beginning of this hypothetical, nobody has an entitlement to anything, and they both pop into existence. With obviously with language and stuff like that. And
okay,
they look around the island and they say, "Hey B, hey A." They have name tags hypothetically. Um,
okay,
and they say, "Okay, well, we're gonna need to survive here. This stick looks like it could be really useful to both of us. So let's both of us own this stick together for our mutual benefit." I feel like I'm being a little clearer there. So is this conversation that they've just had verbatim sufficient to establish some form of co-ownership, or is there some prerequisite that they still haven't satisfied?
I mean, you're not really giving me any content to the ownership agreement, so I can't really say whether this is
Gave
like
you
a
the whole
legitimate case of
conversation.
ownership or not.
So I gave you
Well,
the
I would say
verbatim.
that. Then I
So
would
I'm
say
gonna.
no. Then I would say no. Then because
Great.
there's no content here that I would say qualifies this as ownership. It's just two people saying we own this. It sounds like.
Perfect. Okay, now that's a perfectly coherent answer. So
One
my
might even
question is,
say
what
that is a
I'd
stolen
like to move the
concept.
conversation.
Yeah,
Sure,
you'd be wrong. So
but let's just really quickly, Lego. I want to ask then. Um, I want you to share some insight with me here. This verbatim conversation I've just offered you and the circumstances of the conversation, they didn't satisfy for you that a co-ownership agreement was sufficiently established. So what is missing? What extra steps do they need to do to reach the state where they're in a co-ownership agreement?
we would need content on like their control, the agreements they have on control in the case of co-ownership. I mean, just two people saying we own this. I mean that to me is nothing. Just saying we own this.
Great. Okay. So if that's the case, are we talking about like there's some sort of objective criteria that you're appealing to? And I don't mean objective in the Randian objectivist sense. I just mean that there's some sort of concrete criteria that we can use to say whether or not a co-ownership agreement is. It's not a defeater. I'm just asking for. Sorry, I'm responding to a comment there. This isn't meant to be a defeater, and I'm not participating in the debate as a participant here. I'm trying to prompt the conversation. um, my question is there a concrete step that they can do that you can share with us that will cross the demarcation point between what was not sufficiently a co-ownership agreement? Or is it the case, because what I'm asking here is just for you to give us insight into the nature of co-ownership. I'm not making an argument for or against anything here. So is there concrete criteria that they have to meet that you can share with us? Or are you suggesting, and it could be a third thing too, but are you suggesting that it's going to be up to some sort of subjective interpretation about whether or not any given co-ownership agreement is valid?
I don't even think this is particular to co-ownership. I would say this is just not ownership at all, much less co-ownership. I mean, it's just not ownership for two people to pop into existence and say, we own this. There's no content there that would make me think, okay, this is a substantial claim of ownership in any way. I would say at the very least, ownership would require some socially recognized entitlement to exclude non-owners, or at least some special privilege, such as we've indicated in the definition. There's no special privilege here, so I mean, it fails. I'm trying to stick with the definition that is apparently what we're supposed to be focused on, and what you're positing here does not satisfy that definition. So no, it wouldn't be ownership, just based off the stipulations of the debate on what qualifies as ownership.
Can I just
I feel
jump
like I
into
wasn't clear. Sure. Yeah, please.
maybe just put a new angle on this? I thought you were being Bristol, but apparently, like I think what the
No, I
moderator is asking
understand it. I'm not
for
saying I don't
is
understand
like,
it. My
what
answer is
would
I'm giving
Crusoe and
you a no, and
Friday
I'm giving you the
have to
reason.
do?
Saying I
They're
don't understand the question. So
they're on this island. What would they have to do? What steps would they have to take in order to co-own this stick?
they would have to have some sort of special privilege per the definition that we're using for this debate, which it's been insisted, that's the definition. So we have a definition that's not met for ownership. Therefore, it's
How
not
do they
ownership.
get this special privilege?
How you would get a special privilege is irrelevant. Two random people on an island. What special privilege do these two people have? If you can articulate a special privilege they have, then yeah, would agree that it. But again, that's why I pointed out to moderator when he gives this hypothetical, you're not giving me enough content really to say, yes, this is ownership, because you need to articulate some special privilege these people have gained. That's
So
our
just to be
definition of
clear,
ownership.
I'm not. My question, I must have been unclear, and I apologize about that. So I'm asking you for the purpose of insight to help everyone understand here. Again, this isn't an argument or a defeater. I'm asking you. I didn't suggest that, or the hypothetical I presented does not suggest that they have ownership or not. My question is: here's a hypothetical at face value. What do you think specifically they need to do to get to a valid co-ownership agreement if they're not already. And I'm not making. There's no other built-in.
I can answer that.
So, but great.
Yeah, I
Perfect.
can answer that. We would need to be able to articulate some special privilege that they're both entitled to.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means? I just want to make sure that we've got it all laid out.
We would need to be able to articulate in what sense they have a special privilege that differentiates their ownership from a non-owner.
Zulu, I feel like you want to jump in there too. Please, I'm not
Sure.
trying to.
So they need to articulate some sort of special privilege they have that distinguishes them from owner from non-owner.
Okay. Not what I said, but okay.
Please, Lego, please just give the definition again. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I'm not giving a definition. I'm telling you. Asked me why. What would it be that is needed for this to qualify? Well, yeah. What? And you didn't repeat it. You changed it. So
I was repeating it to try and get you to tell me what's wrong with it.
Right. So the moderator gave a hypothetical and he asked what would be necessary for this what would need to change about this hypothetical for it to qualify as ownership or co-ownership. And the answer was the moderator would need to articulate something in this hypothetical. He would need to add something to this hypothetical that meets the threshold of a special privilege, an entitlement that these people have. And in the case for it being co-ownership, that they both have. If he does not do so, if that's not articulated in the hypothetical, it doesn't meet the definition of ownership that we're using for the debate. So if you want to articulate that into the hypothetical, then yeah, I would say it is ownership. If you just want to posit, yes, they do have special privilege, I would say, yes, that is ownership. If you're not going to say whether they have a special privilege, well, then I can't say whether they have ownership or not.
What if, I think there are other problems with this theory of property, but I will stick with this for now. What if they, at the end of the verbatim discussion, Friday's like, oh, wait a minute, but we need to articulate which special privileges we have. And then Crusoe's like, okay, we'll just both get to always use it. Would that be co-ownership?
Yeah, honestly, I'm kind of through with this whole line here. Are you going to tell me why there's necessarily a contradiction whenever we have co-ownership? I don't care if you're able to come up with hypotheticals where we wouldn't have co-ownership. My argument doesn't rely on all circumstances and all hypotheticals allowing for co-ownership. So even if you can show or not show that this would be or would not be co-ownership, it's irrelevant. You need to. I've given you a hypothetical where we do have ownership satisfied by multiple people. Therefore, we've satisfied P2. So I would need you to tell me, I want to go back to you telling me why P2 has not been satisfied with the pool example. You don't need to give me hypotheticals.
Own a stick. Co-own a stick. It's
a pool. I gave you a hypothetical.
A wants to use the spearfish and B does not want this to happen. Either A is entitled to spearfish or he isn't. A owns the stick if and only if A is entitled to spearfish. B owns the stick if and only if A is not entitled to spearfish. A and B own the stick implies that A is entitled to spearfish and A is not entitled to spearfish. Replace the stick with whatever the hell you want. That's a contradiction, my friend.
Cool. I gave you a hypothetical where multiple people do possess the entitlement.
Whoops, that's not addressing my argument.
So do you want to tell me what the contradiction is?
No, he's not addressing my argument.
I don't need to address your argument. I'm the advocate. You have to address my argument.
I want to address specifically my argument.
You're rejecting
P2. Don't stray from it a hair.
Yeah, or is it my turn to talk now? So I don't have to address your argument. I'm the advocate in the debate. I gave you an argument. You rejected P2, and you said that it's not possible to come. And the reason you rejected P2 is because it's not possible to come up with a co-ownership agreement that doesn't have contradiction. I've given you a co-ownership agreement that does not have contradiction.
Oh, so now
we have multiple owners of the pool.
We can
multiple owners. We have multiple. We have multiple. I'm still talking. We have multiple owners
I don't know if it's fine to
of
build
the
on
pool.
them
They all possess a. I'm still talking. They all possess. I'm still talking actually. So they actually. I'm still talking actually. Yeah, I'm still talking.
Gentlemen, all right. Not punitive, just going to take control here. I just want to let everyone know that we're over an hour now. So nobody's obligated to continue, and I'm not going to put that on anybody either because I think that would be an inappropriate imposition. But what I do want to do before we go is I want to give both of our speakers the opportunity to get their final statements in. And afterwards, I always let everybody go down to the voice channels, and you guys can continue to speak for as long as you wish, with much less moderation, if that's what you're into. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the critic speak first, and I'm going to let the critic summarize what they think the failing was, and what they were attempting to show, and how they attempted to show it, and why they feel that the argument failed to achieve its purposes. That would be the argument on screen here in green. And then once the critic has had the opportunity to make their case for why they think the argument failed, the advocate's going to get the opportunity to say why they believe that their argument succeeded, and how they've overcome the concerns that the critic raised. So I'm going to unmute you, Zulu. Go for it.
Sure. So at the beginning of this debate, Lego gave us his syllogism, and I gave my unanswerable, and I'll elaborate on that in a second, unanswerable deductive argument that co-ownership is impossible. Now, why do I think this is unanswerable? Well, you've seen it in this debate. Every single time that we started building up on some line, we started building out the flow on some point of my argument, my unanswerable argument against him, he will very quickly go, okay, well, let's get back to P2. Let's just get back to P2 real quick. And he does this every single time I start pushing on a pressure point. He runs away, and he runs back. Well, actually, in my syllogism, I said blah, 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 blah. Irrelevant bullshit he will bring up. Every single time. When I'm finally allowed, every time this happens, when I'm allowed to push, what do we find? We find that he bases his entire theory on conceptual fallacies. He steals the concepts all over the board. He relies on just nonsense understanding of property. He doesn't even understand how property comes about in the first place. He doesn't know what it takes for Crusoe and Friday on the desert island to come to own things. He doesn't know or care. He does not give a shit about the concept of property. He's just doing pure and utter word sorcery to try and get one over on me in this debate. And he's been rules lawyering the whole fucking time for that exact same reason. Because he is desperate to avoid this gaping hole in what theory? Not even fucking his theory. He doesn't give a shit about property. What does he give a shit? He didn't care about avoiding conflicts. He didn't care about any of this. His whole property theory, what does it amount to? It amounts to gesturing vaguely at nothing. At not a thing. At just, who cares? We just have property because we have property. And these are the words. I'm going to muddle them about in a certain way, and then I win the debate. No, that's not what we're doing here. We're trying to do philosophy. We're trying to relate our ideas to actual things as they are. Lego cannot do that. He simply cannot.
All right. Thank you for the closing statement. I'm going to let Lego speak. That probably was as close to the line, or probably over the line a little bit, what we like to encourage here in terms of politeness. But I'm going to let Lego have the floor now to make his response, and then we'll take it into the after party. Lego, you're muted.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that when I point to P2, Zulu calls it irrelevant bullshit. The purpose of this debate was for us to debate this argument that I have here. I have an argument that concludes in my proposition being true, and when Zulu wasn't able to address the argument properly, sufficiently, he then starts to call the argument irrelevant bullshit, despite the purpose being to address this argument. He says that I don't have any sort of conflict resolution, despite throughout the debate, him pointing to me, he quoted me throughout the debate, talking about how important conflict resolution is to the agreement. I even gave examples of conflict resolution being included in the agreement. So it's, first it's a little odd to say that the argument that we're debating is irrelevant. What happened here is that Zulu, when incapable of addressing the argument, would try to go down these weird wormholes of, well, what if we're in an apocalypse situation where there's no one alive? Well, what's property then? It's like, well, you don't have property then in that case. That's not really relevant. The P2 here, the thing that he thinks is so irrelevant, but also the thing that he thought defeated my argument, is that it is possible to have a hypothetical case of co-ownership without contradiction. So yes, when Zulu starts going down these frankly irrelevant hypotheticals that don't show that there is some inherent contradiction to co-ownership, I am going to pull him back to P2. And I'm going to point out again the thing that he was never able to address. P2 only requires, you can obviously have many more, but it only requires that I be able to give one example of a hypothetical case of co-ownership without contradiction. That is all P2 requires. And when I gave one, Zulu almost accepted it as a legitimate case, but he always wanted to pivot to, well, I can give you a case where there is a contradiction. But P2 doesn't require that all cases of co-ownership be valid. It only requires that you be able to give one hypothetical where it's valid. And that would justify P2 being true. He didn't have any objections to P1, and the conclusion follows from P1 and P2. So I've satisfied P2 with the hypothetical that he refused to address of multiple people owning a pool, where our definition of ownership is just that they possess this entitlement. Multiple people possess the entitlement due to their agreement. They're able to resolve conflict. P2 is satisfied. We can reach my conclusion. So he can talk about word sorcery and stolen fallacies or stolen concept fallacies. It's really Zulu who's the one who's wanting to evade the argument, going so far as to call the argument we are debating irrelevant bullshit.
Great. Well, I think that both of the closing statements were pretty. Lego, I really hope you were done. I assumed you were done there. It would look really bad on me if you weren't, but I'm pretty confident you were. I think both of those were very equivalent in terms of tone, so I'm comfortable with that for this time. I want to thank both of the participants. They were both great sports, and I was really grateful to hear both of what they had to say. We don't have the opportunity to actually have you guys hear the applause from the audience, so let's just assume that it's there.